Welcome. Before we open a single verse or speak a single Hebrew word, I want to tell you what this series is not. It is not an attempt to replace Torah with something else. It is not an argument that Judaism needs an import from outside itself to be complete. And it is not a suggestion that all religions are secretly the same thing wearing different hats. I don't believe that. And by the end of these 12 episodes, I don't think you will either. What this series is an investigation into a very old idea that beneath the world of physical law, gravity, thermodynamics, biology, there is another order of law. Call it moral law, spiritual law, cosmic law. The philosopher and lecturer Manly P. Hall, who spent 60 years studying the world's esoteric and mystical traditions, called it universal law. He meant something specific. Principles that do not belong to one culture or one century, but that show up in different clothing wherever human beings have looked seriously at the structure of reality, whether in Egypt, in Greece, in India, in the Hermetic writings of late antiquity, and yes, in the Jewish mystical tradition as well. Here is the claim I want to put in front of you, and that we will spend 11 more episodes testing. That Judaism already has a category for this. It is not something the tradition needs to borrow. It has a name, a source text, and a legal status. And most people, including many Jews, have never been taught to notice it. That category is the Noahide law. In Hebrew, Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, the 7 laws of the children of Noah. Turn with me conceptually to Genesis 9 after the flood. God does not give Noah the Torah. Noah is not a Jew. There is no Jewish people yet. That begins later with Abraham and is formalized centuries after that at Sinai. What God gives Noah, and through him all of humanity descended from him, which is to say everyone, is a smaller set of foundational obligations. The prohibitions against idolatry, blasphemy, murder, theft, sexual immorality, eating the flesh of a living animal, and the obligation to establish courts of justice. The Talmud in Tractate Sanhedrin works out the details. Maimonides, the Rambam, codifies them formally in the Mishnah Torah, in the Law of Kings, chapters 8 through 10. And states plainly that any human being, Jew or Gentile, who observes these 7 laws because God commanded them, has a share in the world to come. Sit with what that means. Centuries before Sinai, before the giving of the 613 commandments to the Jewish people specifically, the Torah already describes a universal moral law, one that applies to all of humanity, that does not require conversion, that does not require Hebrew, that does not require the temple or the land of Israel. The Torah's very first legal act towards humanity is not particular. It is universal. Only later does God call one family and then one people into a deeper and more demanding covenant, not to replace the universal law, but to add to it, to carry an additional, more intricate structure of holiness on behalf of the world. This is the frame I want you to hold for the rest of this series. There is universal law, the substratum, the moral architecture available to every human being simply by virtue of being human, made in the image of God. And there is Torah law, the covenantal law, given specifically to the people of Israel at Sinai, more detailed, more demanding, and tied to a particular people's particular mission. The two are not competitors. Torah law does not cancel universal law. It is built on top of it, the way a cathedral is built on a foundation, not instead of one. The body of teaching, often called Hermetic philosophy, the 7 principles of mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender, come to us most directly through a small book called the Kybalion, published in 1908 under the pen name the Three Initiates, almost certainly written primarily by an American New Thought author, William Walker Atkinson. It presents itself as a distillation of teachings going back to Hermes Trismegistus, a legendary Egyptian sage. Scholars are clear that the Kybalion itself is a modern synthesis, not a literal ancient document. Manly Hall knew this history well. He treated Hermetic philosophy, Egyptian religion, Greek mystery schools, and Kabbalah side by side in his own masterwork, The Secret Teaching of All Ages, precisely because he was struck by how often the same structural ideas recur across civilizations that had no contact with one another. That recurrence is the interesting fact. Not that one tradition secretly invented the others, but that human beings, thinking carefully about God, mind, and cosmos, keep arriving at strikingly similar architecture. And when we actually examine the historical record honestly, it often runs the other direction from what people assume. Renaissance Christian scholars who built Western esoteric and Hermetic philosophy, men like Pico della Mirandola in the 15th century, were explicitly, admittedly, drawing on Jewish Kabbalah, which predates them by centuries. The Tree of Life you may have seen in occult bookstores did not migrate into Judaism from Hermetic philosophy. It migrated out of Jewish mysticism through Christian and Hermetic scholars into the broader Western esoteric tradition. We will spend an entire episode on that history later in the series because it deserves to be told properly. So the purpose of this series is not syncretism for its own sake. It is this: to use the vocabulary of universal law, a vocabulary developed largely outside the Jewish world, but describing patterns the Jewish mystical tradition had already mapped in its own language, often earlier and more rigorously, as a doorway. A doorway for the person raised in Torah who wants language to explain what they already sense. A doorway for the person outside of Judaism, curious about Hermeticism or universal law, who may discover that the Sefer Yetzirah and the Zohar got there first and got there deeper. And a doorway for anyone of any background who suspects that the universe has a moral grain to it and wants to know whether the world's great traditions of wisdom actually agree. Over the next 11 episodes, we will take each of the 7 Hermetic principles in turn and set it beside its counterpart in classical Jewish thought, in Torah, Talmud, Sefer Yetzirah, the Zohar, and the writings of Rambam, Ramban, and the Ari, Rabbi Isaac Luria, and we will look at the Noahide law and the 613 side by side in real detail. We will trace the actual history of the Tree of Life, and we will end not in abstraction, but in ethics, because a universal law that does not change how you treat other people is not a law at all. It is decoration. One note before we finish. I'm not asking you to accept every comparison I offer. I am asking you to test them the way the Talmud teaches us to test an argument. Tzarich iyun. This requires examination. Some parallels will hold up under real scrutiny. Some will be looser than they first appear. That tension is not a flaw in this project, it is the project. A living tradition is not afraid of comparison. It survives comparison, and often it shines more clearly because of it. In the next episode, we begin with the first and in some ways the most radical of the 7 principles, mentalism. The all is mind, and its startling parallel in the Jewish doctrine of Ein Sof, the infinite, and the way the world was spoken, not built into being.